Take. Yesterday, we heard from the owner of the Bills, Terry Pegula, for the first time in years, and he revealed, well, a lot. He inexplicably dissected the Keon Coleman drafting and then told the story on why Sean McDermott was fired after 9 years. The reporters in Buffalo also needed more clarity on McDermott's dismissal, so listen to this exchange.
You mentioned that you thought it was a catch and told Josh it was a catch. Why would you fire a coach based on a bad officiating decision?
I did not fire a coach based on a bad officiating decision. If I can take you into that locker room, I felt like we hit the proverbial playoff wall year after year.
That part I can understand, right? Because it does feel like this kind of bad luck thing happens every year for Buffalo. But while this is going on, which was during our show yesterday, social media is going nuts. We all can't believe what we're hearing in real time. After that press conference, does this now make Buffalo's job less appealing? Ryan, what do you think?
An MVP quarterback will always outweigh a bumbling idiot owner. Period. People aren't going to sit around and say to themselves, I don't want to go coach Josh Allen because Terry Pegula talks and it gets on my damn nerves. That's not what they're going to say. Now, here's what the problem is. Terry Pegula walked into that locker room and saw Josh Allen crying.
Right.
Because before the playoffs started, they thought to themselves, Patrick Mahomes ain't in it. Joe Burrow ain't in it. Lamar Jackson's not in it. Oh, we have to be able to win it. And so then he looked at Josh Allen and he looked at the locker room and he said to himself, something has to change. He didn't put it in context and say to himself, you know what? We don't really have a roster that was built to win a Super Bowl. This roster with the skill players we have, the skill players that are injured, with the inability to stop the run, with an inability to get a rush, being on the back end, not being as sound or talented as we should be, we probably don't have the people in the locker room, so maybe we should look at the person that's selecting the players. And then he lied. Because Brandon Beane is actually on camera saying to himself that barring getting anything amazing, we're going to draft Keon Coleman. Sean McDermott wasn't talking to Terry Pegula in the draft room. That was Brandon Beane. So now we've gotten into CYA because we know we fired a coach that has been a great coach, a coach that has gotten us to this point over and over again. And even though in this time when he didn't get us over the hump, we actually don't have a better coach to go hire other than a coach that gets along with our quarterback. So the problem to me is not that this is ever going to be a bad job because their quarterback is too damn talented. But what's happening is they know they made a mistake. Sean McDermott should not have been fired. This team didn't underachieve because they weren't well coached or they weren't well prepared. The bottom line is they are home right now because they got their all-world quarterback to the dance and he forgot the steps. He missed throws, he threw interceptions, he fumbled the ball. That's why they aren't continuing to move on in this year's playoffs.
Listen, this was a disaster press conference. It was.
Correct.
There was no plan for how Terry Pegula was going to communicate to the public why Sean McDermott was fired. At one point, it was because of the Brandon Cooks catch interception play. At one point, it was because they lost. At one point, it was because the playoff proverbial wall that they hit. Another point, it was because they saw the emotion from the players, Josh Allen crying in the locker room. So there wasn't a clear message. I think there's parts of the press conference that you sit there and go like, okay, yeah, I can understand that. That makes sense. In the moment when watching it, I was like, whew, this job, I think you're going to lose some people that would have been interested in it. In the moment. After a couple hours subsided, I was like, no, dude, this is still, one, a great fan base, two, a good roster. I think the roster is better than people are giving it credit for. They've won more games in the last season in the regular season than anybody in football, and they have a quarterback that has accounted for 253 touchdowns in that span, which are 47 more than any other player in the NFL. So there's not jobs that come open in the NFL that have all of those in place. This is a rare job that's open in the NFL. Usually when you take a job in the NFL, you're going to a place that you're crossing your fingers that you can get it right. We got two in this cycle. This place and Baltimore. When you're walking in going, we can go with a Super Bowl like now. And so now you're walking into high expectations, but this is still at the very worst the second most attractive job.
And it's because normally teams that make it to the divisional playoff round don't fire their coach.
Correct.
Right? That's why this job
Win the
is
divisional
different.
playoff round.
Correct.
You know.
Well, lost, I suppose.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, you're both wrong. And you're both wrong because of everything that Ryan Clark said. That happens to be absolutely right. See, the question is the job less attractive? Not whether the job is attractive or not. See the difference? This is the journalist guy. This is me. Less attractive. So in other words, what I'm saying to you is this. Here's the deal. Of course the job is attractive. But when you see an owner that speaks the way that he did, that says that Saturday walking into the locker room and seeing his coach and his quarterback emotional and downtrodden because he lost, and that was the reason you fired the dude that won 73% of his games over the last 6 years, which was tops in the National Football League, that's been to the playoffs 7 consecutive years, that went to the playoffs 8 times in 9 years, and you fired them because you walked into the locker room and your quarterback was emotional after a loss. That doesn't make an attractive boss. That's number one. Number two, you have the GM, Mr. Brandon Beane. You could have got additional help because you knew you needed it before the trading deadline for Josh Allen. You didn't do it, okay? The wide receiver spot was flagrantly lacking. Everybody was talking about it. You did nothing. And then as a result of that, you lose in the playoffs, okay? And when you lose in the playoffs, not only does the coach get fired, stay with me. The coach, it's not that McDermott, first of all, McDermott should not have been fired. RC and I talked about this the other day. McDermott absolutely positively should not have been fired. But what made it worse was that you promoted Beane the same day. So in other words, it was the coach. It had nothing to do with him, which is why they were taking heat from the local media. The job is attractive, but it's less attractive when you see an owner who appears a bit clueless, and on top of it all, a GM that appears to be covering his you-know-what. Now, in fairness to Beane, we have to be fair here. He has spoken up adamantly. He was very emotional, got teary-eyed, talk about he's been in this in 19 years, and he didn't appreciate his character being questioned by folks. That is absolutely his right. And he is right to be as outspoken as he was in defense of his character as a man. Okay, I get that part. But he also has to acknowledge the optics. The coach that has been succeeding didn't get over the hump to the Super Bowl. I got that part. But he's a winning coach, gets you to the playoffs every year, actually won 5 more playoff games than John Harbaugh did in Baltimore in the last 8 years, okay? That man doesn't get you to the Super Bowl. He gets fired, but somehow, some way, you not only keep your job, you get promoted, and then we learned from Mad Dog Russo yesterday, in case y'all missed it, Vic Carucci, who's been a long-time NFL guy, said that, with connections to Buffalo, said that McDermott went into the owner's office weeks ago and said, we don't have a Super Bowl roster. So when you deduce all of that, it is not beyond the pale for somebody to attach that to say, Beane might have got a bit defensive and went about the business of protecting himself, speaking up for himself since he's responsible for assembling the roster. And he may have done, and that's why this may have ended up being the way that it was. Whether it's true or not, all of those reports were out prior to the press conference. Some says that's what compelled the press conference because Bagula, D.O., isn't accustomed to talking. People talk about how they hadn't heard from him in years. So he doesn't usually talk. So suddenly he's talking, and when he talks, he goes out of his way to come to the defense of Beane. Think about that. That's what makes it suspicious, and Beane has to at least own the optics of that situation.
Stephen A., you think that Joe Brady, who's their offensive coordinator, looks at this job less desirable now than he did yesterday morning?
No, I'm not saying him
Daboll?
because he's there. Because he's there. What I'm saying is when you have a coach, yes, I do. When you have a coach, when you have an owner, rather, that goes out of his way to support the GM, and the GM comes across as somebody who's covering his you-know-what. I'm not saying that doesn't make the job attractive because Josh Allen is there. And you know you got a good team. but the operative word is less. You know, when you think about that,
So
you're
you
going to
mean
raise
to
your
tell me
eyebrow.
that
Wait a
you
minute, let's see
believe
how these
that
cats comfort
Brian
themselves.
Daboll, you believe that Brian Daboll or Grant Udinsky or a Jesse Minter or an Anthony Weaver, you think that those guys look at this job less desirably today than they did yesterday morning?
I think those guys look at the job and say, damn it, I ain't turning it down and I get offered it because it's Josh Allen. But I'm going to keep a raised eyebrow about those two people in Pegula and Bean. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I think also what happens is when an owner like Pegula comes out and speaks for the first time, you start to feel like he's more involved in what happens every day within the building than he really is, right? When whoever takes this job, they're going to deal with assistant coaches. They're going to deal with the scouts. They're going to deal with the GM, Brandon Beane, as well. But Terry Pegula is not going to be there for the day-to-day workings of what makes football teams go. But Josh Allen is, right? Some of these, James Cook is, some of these other pieces that do make this job attractive will be there. And so to me, this is one of those things that's important to us now, but when it's time to take a job, if offered to be the head coach of the Buffalo Bills, Terry Pegula will be very low on the totem pole of reasons why you wouldn't.
Yeah, look, that just adds more pressure, right, to this new head coach, whoever's going to step in, because clearly it's Super Bowl or bust right now in Buffalo. Exactly. Could Mike McCarthy be a good fit in Pittsburgh? We have someone here who isn't too high on the possible move. Plus, an ESPN piece was released detailing a lot of info about what's going on inside the Lakers building with LeBron James and Jeannie Buss. We'll talk about that next as well.
You're watching First